Good morning. It's good to see everyone here. And it's been a little bit of a quick day for me. I've been in 2 churches already. This is my second, but it's great to be back here. For those who don't know me, boys, good to see you. Those who don't know me, I go to Lilydale Church as a more regular attender there. And I also teach at the Edinburgh College. I'm the design and tech teacher up there, play with wood, motors, small engines, all sorts of cool stuff. And it's great to be back here to be able to share a message with you today. What I want to do is I want to take you back to the turn of last century. It was known as the heroic age of exploration. And there was one continent that seemed to elude many from being able to conquer it. Does anyone want to take a wild guess? Which continent was the hardest one to try and discover, and what part of it hadn't been discovered yet? Antarctica. And what hadn't they made it to yet? The South Pole. They hadn't got there. And so in this time frame, there were many that had given it a shot. There was Robert Scott, Ernest Shackleton, Roald Amundsen, and Douglas Mawson. Had all had experiences with going down there, and I haven't got time to try and dig it all through. The story that I've got right at the moment comes mostly from Peter Fitzsimmons and his story Mawson, but there's all sorts of different ways that this can be interpreted, and I'm more than happy for those to go and interpret whichever way they like. The person I wanted to focus on today was Douglas Mawson. He's an Australian and a good person and a good bloke. It was an interesting time, and it was a bit of a time when there was a gentlemanly agreement as to when you were going to go and try these explorations, and you weren't going to go down there and surprise people. You would let people know you're on your way so that if anybody else wanted to challenge, they would have the opportunity. And so Scott had put together a team. He was going on down, and what he found out on the way down was that Roald Amundsen had basically done the dirty. He'd already left and then sent a message afterwards to say that this is where he was going, this is where he was leaving from, and this is all he was going to get to the pole first. It ended badly. Scott didn't make it home. This is a very short version. Roald Amundsen got the title of being the first to the South Pole, but he wasn't well received in England. They didn't like him very much. He was from Norway. Scott tried his best, got down there and came back most of the way, but didn't make it. Shackleton had a shot, but his regard for his own men was higher than his ambition to get to the South Pole, and he turned around about 100 kilometres short of the South Pole. Mawson had been on some of these expeditions and said, I'm not really interested in this whole let's try and get to the South Pole. He was based in South Australia and had studied through the Flinders Ranges and then said, there's some geology that matches up with the Flinders Ranges. I'm going to try and work out how the Earth sort of came to be, and some of the stuff in Antarctica matches up with Flinders Ranges. And so he went down there on a scientific quest. His purpose was to discover, not to be the best, not to be the first, but to discover. And so he set off down there with 8 teams of men and wanted to explore a large area of land known as the Adelie Peninsula. And it was massive. And they all get down there and they found a place to build their hut, which happens to be the windiest place on the earth. It can get up to 300 kilometres an hour with its winds. And when they landed, it was only a balmy sort of 50k an hour wind. And they managed to build a hut, which still stands there today. And they stayed in that. When the summer came, it was time to set off. And so Mawson sent off his different teams, and he himself went off in one particular direction and took 2 people with him. He took with him Belgrave Ninnis, let me make sure I get this right, and Xavier Mertz. And they started on their journey. To shorten this up a little, it wasn't an easy one. They travelled 480 kilometres on foot or with sleds away from their base camp. Things were going well. They were making great discoveries. They had a good system in place where they would go over. They had one person on light skis. Mertz was up in front, And he was spotting out for what's in Antarctica that can kill you like that. Not polar bears, by the way. Crevasses. So he's going and sort of, okay, can I find these things? Because he was light, it was unlikely that he would go through and fall to his death, so he found out where they were. Then Mawson would come through next with a lighter load and some of the gear. And lastly, Ninnis would come through with the majority of the dogs and the rest of their gear, food and so on. At 480 k's away from home, their purpose suddenly changed. Their purpose was to discover. Mertz had gone through, he'd spotted this crevasse, he'd yelled out and warned the others. Mawson had gone over the crevasse and sort of motioned to Ninnis behind him, just follow me, just stay in my tracks, you'll be right. And he continues on. And then he sees Mertz turns around and there's a look of horror on his face and he starts skiing back and he says, what's going on? And as he turns around, there's nothing. Ninnis is gone. There's not a trace of his dogs, there's not a trace of anything. He'd fallen through a crevasse. Their purpose was originally to discover. Now their purpose had changed. Their purpose had changed to survive. They'd gone over to the edge of the crevasse. They looked down there, they saw one dog. It had broken its back about 150 feet down, or 43 metres or thereabouts. There was nothing they could do. Their food happened to be on that sled. It was gone. There was one part of this story I've left out. See, just before Mawson left, he had a sweetheart. Her name was Paquita, Francesca Del Prat, but Paquita was her nickname. And they had been good friends for quite some time, and he had been a man who was married to his work. But friends and so forth had sort of convinced him to say, hey, look, this is a good deal. You probably should make this sort of, put a ring on it. And so he'd proposed when he'd left, saying, I'll be back in about a year. Ladies, how would you go with that? Proposal, disappear. You should ask my wife about that. That's exactly what I did. I proposed to her and then disappeared for a month over to the Bible lands and came back, and no, she was still keen, so it was all good. So Mertz and Mawson are now stuck 480 k's away from their home. Francesca doesn't know anything about it. They make some basic decisions very quickly. They'd left a small stash of gear a little bit further back, so they bolted back there. It was about a 30k height. Get back to that, then they've got to make some decisions. How are they going to travel the rest of the way to get home safe again? They do have a little food that lasts them for a little while, but it's not really a G-rated part of the story, but well, dogs. It was how they survived. And as the dogs got sort of a bit tired or sick, they were pensioned off and they became the food for Mertz and for Mawson. What they didn't know was that the dogs were high in vitamin A and it was gradually killing them. Mertz becomes really sick about 160 k's short of their goal of getting back to camp. And then Mawson is stuck in this dilemma. If I'm going to survive this, I need to leave this man alive and go, knowing that he would die as soon as I leave him. And so his purpose then starts coming into question. What was my purpose? Is it to save myself or save my team? He'd witnessed this in Shackleton already, where Shackleton said, no, I'm going to make sure I take care of my team. I don't worry about the goal. Mertz has gone into all sorts of deliriums. There's all sorts of problems there. So as it happened, Mertz passes away that night. Mawson sort of has to pull everything together, buries his friend, leaves him there with a rough cross and some ice blocks to try and bury him, and then looks at the purpose ahead of him. His purpose is to travel 160 k's to get back. He actually wants to get back close enough so that his diaries of himself and Mertz can actually make it to the people so that people know what they did. The story of their survival, the science that they'd done was going to be getting out to the public. You think it's hard so far. It gets worse. As he's skiing back, he hasn't got any dogs, there's nothing left. He's pulling a sled himself. And as he's skiing along, crack! And he free falls. He falls into a crevasse himself. And he is exhausted. We've got to understand what he's going through at the moment. The stories of him are that his feet, the soles of his feet were falling off. He actually duct taped them back on. He had sores all over his legs. In fact, they talk about he was chafed raw from the waist down. And he's still got this mission in front of him. And so when he falls through this crevasse, two thoughts go through his mind. One is, I'm done. I've got nothing left. How easy would it be? Because what happens is when he falls through the crevasse, the sled, by miracle, jams in the top of the crevasse. He is held by the harness and he's 14 feet down. And he's saying the easy option is to just drop. But what crosses his mind at that moment, do you think? Who was he missing? Who was going to miss him? Paquita. So Paquita gives him the energy where he forces himself up. There's knots all through this particular piece of leather strapping. He forces himself up to one knot. He forces himself up to the next knot. He gets all the way to the top and falls back in. This is a true story. You can read it up. It's phenomenal. He then makes that decision again. No, I am not going this way. He goes back up, lands out feet first, I don't know how. He'd borrowed money, borrowed energy he didn't have, lands on top of the ice and stays there just motionless for about an hour before getting up and continuing on. To shorten stories again, he gets back to a cache. It's about 30 k's away from where his base is. He's able to replenish his food and so forth. He knows that there's a time limit because the boat that was going to carry them back to Tasmania was leaving on such and such a date, and he knew he was already past that, but he'd hoped if he got there, maybe they'd left something for him, he might be able to get back to the hut. As he crests over the last hill to see where the station was, what does he see sailing away? The boat. He'd missed it by hours. Now, they did manage to radio it. He had put down some of the most advanced technology at the time, and he was able to radio from Antarctica back to Tasmania, believe it or not, via Macquarie Island. So he radioed back and said, hey, look, we're back. Can you come? Is there a possibility of turning around? And the boat does. Comes back, waits in the bay, only to be hit by one of the worst blizzards. They can't get to shore, he can't get out, and the boat then says, look, I've got to go and pick up another group. I can't stay here, otherwise we're risking the lives of many men. You'll have to stay here for another year. I'll be back in a year. And that's what happens. The boat goes, he's stuck down there for another year. What do you think his purpose was? Stay alive? Do you know what they did while they were down there? They went back to their original purpose. Let's discover. We're stuck here. We can't swim home. We can't get away from this place. Let's explore. And some of the things that they discovered during that time we are still using today as evidence or understandings of how Antarctica was formed. It's a pretty phenomenal story. But when the ship does come back and he gets back to his beloved Paquita, what do you think happens? They'd been 2 years apart. He'd promised one, it was 2. They married pretty much instantly. And he never left her side after that. Of those 4 explorers, Amundsen, he died when he was flying over the North Pole trying to be a hero again. Scott didn't make it back, was in his 40s and he passed away. Shackleton Massive heart attack when he goes back down to try and be in Antarctica again. Dies in his 40s, and his wife says, bury him down there. Mawson lived until he was 76. Wrote more than 80 scientific papers, is recognised worldwide, and has claimed a large portion of Antarctica for Australian use. What was his purpose? How important was that purpose? When we get to Adventist Church, or our Adventist Church here, we have a lot of purposes. We have a lot of things that we can be involved in and we can do. And our purpose sometimes changes a bit over time. But did you know that in the Bible it talks about how the Bible talks about how this church was called into purpose? Have you found it? Have you read it? Have a look in Revelation chapter 10. Turn your Bibles to Revelation 10. In Revelation 10, it talks about a mighty angel coming down. Now, tell me what he looks like. Sorry, I'm a school teacher. I'm not a monologuist. I like it when people talk back to me, so I'm fine with that. So what does it say this angel looks like? It's a mighty angel. What's he clothed with? A cloud. What's his face look like? The sun. What was above his head or on his head? Rainbow. What was his feet look like? Have you seen any of those descriptions before? Have you seen them anywhere else? Ezekiel? Yeah, there'd be some in there. And who's it referring to? Sorry? Second coming of Christ. In fact, if you look in Revelation chapter 1 or chapter 3, and you look at Daniel chapter 10, you see those sorts of comparisons. You put down a list. The lists that's here suggest that, and I'll go with our spirit of prophecy on this one. It's either Jesus himself or a direct representative of him. That means this message that's coming down, if it's delivered in such a way that's either a really close representative of Jesus or Jesus himself, is it important? Absolutely. And then he goes down and says he has something in his hand. What is it? A book. A little scroll. A bibliotheridion. We got Bible, right? Collection of books. A bibliotheridion is a little book. He's got this open in his hand, which means what was it before? Closed. It was shut. Did you know there's one book of the Bible that was shut? Daniel's book. Go your way, Daniel, close up the words, for it is for the time of the end. That's shut. So he's saying, no, it's time for this to be opened. The time has arrived. Now, I'm going to have to skip over a bit, otherwise we will be here all afternoon. But let's keep going. He's standing on right foot on the what? Sea, and the left foot is on the... What does that mean? The whole world. There's nothing excluded. We know from the Bible in Revelation chapter 19, verse 17, that waters represent what? People. And therefore deserted areas such as land would be less people. We see that from the beasts of Revelation chapter 13. But he's saying this message is for everyone. Is anybody excluded? Is there somebody that doesn't live on land or sea? And don't please put up the ISS. International Space Station, for those who weren't sure. That doesn't count. But he then says, this is a really important message, and we're going to jump down a little bit. We're going to look at verse 7. In the days of the sounding of the seventh angel, when he is about to sound the what? Sound the trumpet, yes. What's the next little bit? The mystery of God would be finished. Now, what is the mystery of God? Apart from all his ways are mysterious, he's above us, we don't know exactly how he operates. My ways are not your ways, those sorts of things. What's prophecy? Part of it, yes. I'm going to not use my own words to define this one. I'm going the spirit of prophecy again. I'm going to the SDA commentary. The mystery of God, that which he reveals to his children, is his purpose for them. Their purpose would be finished. And you know what that is? The plan of redemption. Does anybody of you know, or any one of you know, why a God who is infinitely powerful above all things would allow himself to become a human being and sacrificed in the most despicable ways in order to save people who do not even love him? Is that a mystery to you? Do we love it? We do love it. It's an amazing thing. But why would we do that? Without the influence of God on our hearts, would we do that? So that mystery, that plan of redemption would be about to be finished. And it's the same calling that comes to us. So let's have a look a little bit here. In verses 8 through 11, I'm going to summarise a little bit because I'm presuming we don't go too much past 12. Is that right? He then says, go and take the little book and do what with it? Open it, yes, and then do a little bit more than that. Eat it. How many of you have devoured a book before? Have you found a book that you just can't put down? Quite a lot of them? Sorry? A real page turner. So here he's saying, devour this book. Now the other thing about it is, have you heard the old saying of, what you are is what you eat? Do I need to stay near these? Okay, I'm a teacher, I need to walk. You are what you eat. So what they're saying with this is, when you ingest this, when you take hold of the message that is in the book of which one? Which book was it? Daniel. Do you know which part of the book that was really a mystery to even Daniel? The 2,300 days, because it was to do with the cleansing of the sanctuary, of which Daniel thought at the time was Jerusalem. But God was referring to the heavenly sanctuary. So Daniel talks about he was sick and fainted for days, and he did not understand it. All the rest he kind of got. He understood beasts and so on, but he didn't understand what the sanctuary message was. And you'll see that when you read chapter 9, when it talks about him praying earnestly to God, basically saying, please don't forget your promise that you've given us in Jeremiah. You're going to put us away in Babylon for 70 years. We understand that. But then you said you were going to be returning back home and we can establish the sanctuary services again and we can be your people once more. You see, Daniel misunderstood. He didn't understand it. So when we're looking at this book of Daniel, when he's taking and eating it, he's devouring it, he's understanding, he's studying it, he's trying to make it part of his whole being. And then the angel gives a warning and says, take and eat of it. In your mouth it will be sweet, but in your belly, bitter. Now, how many of you have done eating before? Which one comes first? Does it get your stomach first or your mouth first? I know there's times when us boys particularly just wish you could have it open, let's get back to work. But usually it's a very nice food and we want to try and enjoy and savour the time. Hence, by the way, Weet-Bix is so good because it's... Anyway. But the first interpretation of this, so when they understand, the 2,300 days, it starts coming around in the 1840s. And by the way, it wasn't just William Miller. It was global. Did you know kids in Switzerland as young as were standing on soapboxes and preaching this message? Isn't that cool? That's why I give my students no quarter when they say, we can't understand this one. Kids 5 years old can get this. So, your first interpretation. In the 1840s, what was their first interpretation of the 2,300 day message? Jesus was coming back in their lifetime. And did they have a date? Yeah, what was the date? October 22, 1844. Now, as you're coming up to that date, imagine you're back with that group of people. You are days of seeing your Saviour face to face. Sweet? All of a sudden, all the pain, the toils, the suffering, the sicknesses, all those sorts of things pale into insignificance because in a few days, we are going to be with Jesus and he's going to take us home. Is there any sweeter message than that? But tell me, what happened on October 23? He didn't come. They're using a bit of hyperbole, but they're saying if there were 70,000 believers on October 22, there were 70 on October 23. We cannot understand that disappointment. Their purpose prior to that time was to get that message out. Jesus is coming. They were classed as fools. They were ridiculed. There was all sorts of nasty things said about them. Can you imagine having to stay around and face that? You were wrong. You're still here. You're broke. You sold everything. Oh, I don't want to be in your shoes. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine then why people would then completely turn their back on God? But God wasn't finished. God was not done. In fact, how many of us in our own lives have had that time when we've gripped onto God by the fingernails of our hands? Why things don't seem to be going as well as they could, but you go, I am not letting you go. You know Jacob's trouble? I will not let you go unless you bless me. That's what God was sifting through this process. I want the people who will not let go of God no matter what. Because he says at the end of that, once you've gone through this experience, I want you to go and preach again. Have a look at verse 11. You must prophesy again. Prophesy means preach. About many nations, peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. And this is what we call a link text. Are they told what to preach? Is there anything in that verse so far to say, and I want you to send this message? There's nothing. So we need to go over a couple of chapters and all of a sudden there's that link that says, oh, you remember that bit? By the way, the Bible's awesome at this. It is fantastic. It will have a phrase and you go, I want you to refer back. And did you know Revelation is a summary of the Old Testament? What you read in the New Testament, sometimes you need the keys of the Old Testament to unlock. So Revelation is calling us back to going, hang on, I need you to remember things from back in the Old Testament. There's another story behind that. I don't think I've got time for it at the moment. But he's saying, I want you to prophesy again. I want you to preach. I'll give you the message, but I've got some more information for you. And then he goes through Revelation 11, Revelation 12, Revelation 13. Revelation 12 and 12 to 14 is the middle of the chiastic structure of Revelation, which means the high point's in the middle. You know how you try and read a book and the climax is at the end? Well, it's not in Revelation, it's in the middle. And then it's chiastic, which means everything that happens on this side, there's an equal and opposite one that happens on this side. Study for another time. But in Revelation 14, there's a call. It says, there's another message to go out. And this is what I want to go out. Have a look at verse 6 and see if you recognise something. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 6. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to those to preach to those who dwell on the earth. Now let's see if we can figure out the link to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. Now he's saying, I've got a group of people, here's the message. Do you know which church came out of 1844? This one. There were other churches that came up at the same time, by the way, too. There was the Rappings, there was the Fox Valley spiritualistic sort of stuff, there was the Jehovah's Witnesses, there was the Mormons, there was a whole bunch that came out at the same time. There was one that came out that matched the Bible description. That's ours. And sometimes we forget our purpose. We forget where we came from. And we get caught up with all the different things that are going around. And most of them are good, don't get me wrong. Most of them are good things. But we forget where we came from. We forget our purpose. This everlasting gospel is relevant for our day. Did you know the gospel's changed a little bit over time? What was the gospel to Adam and Eve? There's going to be a coming Saviour. What was the gospel to Noah? Get on the boat. Build an ark, get on the boat. Abraham? I'll make you a great nation, and all of the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. Now, these are all good things, but they were relevant to the people at the time. You look at the Gospel of Isaiah, to King Uzziah, Jotham, forgotten him, Ahaz, you might be able to tell me, Ahaz and Hezekiah, I think. His gospel was, hey, guys, you need to turn from your evil ways or you're going to head to Babylon. Jeremiah said the same thing. Micah said the same thing. For the northern tribes, we had Amos and Hosea. Those guys were sending through the gospel, the good news for their time. Did you know that we are living in the times when Jesus can come back? I can't say that we'll all make it there. We'll be alive when he turns up. We don't know the day or the hour. But it's possible. And so therefore God has sent out this message and says, I want you, my group of people, to prepare the world for his return. And I need to put a disclaimer in here. Does that mean Adventists are the only ones going to heaven? Not at all. And this is where I love the spirit of prophecy, where it talks on this. It says, no, leave the Salvation Army alone. They are doing a great work, but it's not your work. In fact, the spirit of prophecy talks about and says there will be people who are in heaven who have not even heard the name of Jesus. Isn't that cool? And if I believe in a God that is willing to die himself in order to save people, is he going to be the type of God that excludes people on a whim? Or is he going to be the inclusive God where he says, all who will come to me, all who confess that I am Lord, I will save? But it doesn't change our purpose as a church. Our purpose is to take those three angels' messages and spread them far and wide. Because when the whole earth has heard those messages, do you know what happens next? Christ comes. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. We focus on Matthew 24 and go, oh, hang on, there's earthquakes. Oh, there's wars. No. None of those bring about the end. If you read through, it says these things are going to happen. This is the order that they're going to happen in. But if you want to bring about the end, take the gospel to the world. That's the job. Don't worry about the bad stuff. So that's going to happen anyway. Do your purpose. Finish your task. The three angels' messages are amazing. I've wanted to dig even further down into this, and every time I dig, there's more jewels. If I can try and summarise it this way, the three angels' messages are a summary of the whole Bible. I used to teach it when I was teaching Bible down in Hobart. It used to take me a year to get through 6 verses. It is that intense. It goes back. Can we just do a taster? Fear God. Do you know what that means? We have an English sort of overtone that we put onto it. And we run down the line of phobos, which is what the one word or translation of fear is phobos. And we get the word what? Phobia. Has anyone seen somebody with a phobia? What is that like? They're just a sort of a mild dislike? Or is it catatonic? I can't deal with this. The thing is, that's not that word. That is not the word that God uses here. He uses another one called phobeo. And you know what that is? It's kind of I'm going to tread on holy ground here, but it's the kind of the fear between a husband and a wife. Now, I know we said it before of some sort of joke about that, but let me try and put it to you in a context that's more reasonable. It means you fear hurting them. You fear putting something in that relationship that causes it to be destroyed. You fear letting the other person down. That's different. It's a relational fear. It's I want to love God above all else. I want to put him first in my life. And as you go through the three angels' messages, what you find is it's progressive. You can't go to, Mark of the Beast stuff until you've got the first ones in place. Until you love God, you can't preach about the mark of the beast or the destruction of the wicked. It doesn't come out right. Until you've got an honouring of God's commandments in your life, you can't go on and show someone else how to live theirs. Fear God, give glory to him. The hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, and sea, and springs of water. It is an awesome message, 5 parts. Fear God, love him above all else. Give glory to him. Reflect his character in your own life. Keep his commandments. The hour of his judgment has come. It's a reference to the 1844 movement, saying there's an importance, an impetus to this message. Take it to the world. Then honour him as creator. If you've got an evolutionist Adventist, you've got someone who's really confused, because that message there is saying straight away, remember your creator. And the last one is, did you know that last piece of the first angel's message goes back to the Old Testament? It's almost a direct quote from Exodus 20. Anyone want to take a guess what's in Exodus 20? 10 Commandments. Do anyone want to take a wild guess as to which commandment that phrase comes from? The 4th, which is? Sabbath. See, when we've got those things in order, then we know how to keep Sabbath as well. When we love God, we want to keep his commandments. We know there's an urgency of telling others about his soon return. We know that he is our creator and our saviour. Then we know how to keep Sabbath. Then we're ready to start worrying about Babylon and all the other stuff. So if my encouragement for you from this sermon, remember your purpose. Remember the purpose of this church. Have a look at it. Study it out. Look inward before outward. Make sure that you are getting closer to Jesus every day, because what we've found from today's service is that Jesus is coming back soon, not very far away. We don't know whether that's today, tomorrow, another 100 years. But for each one of us, our last dying breath is when Jesus comes for us. That is our last opportunity to influence the world for his soon return. May I encourage you this year, as we go into 2024, we're only 2 weeks in, but as we go into there, remember your purpose. Don't get distracted by the things of the world. Remember those things that are going to take us closer to Jesus. And if I wanted to give you a phrase to try and remember this year by, is what I'm doing now going to take me closer to Jesus or further away?